The air in the emergency room was a thick soup of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of blood, a perfume I had long grown accustomed to. It clung to my scrubs, my hair, my very skin. 26 hours into a double shift, my world had narrowed to the squeak of my worn-out sneakers on the linoleum and the rhythmic, desperate beeping of monitors that served as the hospital's frantic heartbeat. My own pulse was a sluggish, exhausted drum against my ribs. Another hour, I promised myself, just one more hour, and I could go home to my empty, shoebox apartment and the mountain of bills on the kitchen counter that seemed to multiply in the dark. Sleep was a luxury, a distant memory of a life I used to have before my parents' long illnesses had devoured their savings and then mine. Now I work to live and live to work, a hamster on a wheel powered by caffeine and student loan debt. Then the world outside exploded in a symphony of sirens. A fire, a bad one, downtown in the financial district. The call came in and the relative calm of the ER shattered like glass. We were swamped. Smoke inhalation, burns, lacerations from falling debris. It was controlled chaos, a brutal dance of triage and treatment. I moved on autopilot, my hands steady even as my mind screamed for rest. I was stitching a gash on a firefighter's arm, the scent of soot and sweat sharp in my nostrils, when they wheeled him in. He wasn't a firefighter. His suit, what was left of it, was Italian, a whisper of impossible wealth in its charred, tailored lines. A watch on his wrist, its face shattered, still glinted with the cold fire of diamonds. He was covered in grime and soot, a dark streak of blood matting his black hair at the temple, but he radiated an aura of stillness that was utterly alien in the surrounding panic. He wasn't panicked. He was furious. His eyes, the color of storm clouds just before a downpour, scanned the room with a terrifying, assessing calm, dismissing the chaos as an inconvenience. They landed on me, and for a second, the world fell silent. He needs a private room. Now a man beside the gurney, older, with a face like carved granite, barked at the charge nurse. Our charge nurse, a woman who could stare down a charging bull, just pointed a weary finger. He gets a bay like everyone else. We're at capacity. He's lucky he's not in the hall. I finished the firefighter's last stitch, patted his shoulder, and moved toward the new patient. His stormy eyes tracked me, missing nothing. I'm Alara. I'm your nurse. I need to get your vitals and assess your injuries, I said, my voice clipped with professional exhaustion. Up close, the sheer force of his presence was overwhelming. He was tall, even lying down, with a frame built of lean, hard muscle that was evident even through the ruined suit. The air around him seemed to crackle with a low, dangerous energy. He didn't answer. He just watched me as I attached the blood pressure cuff to his arm, my fingers brushing against skin that was surprisingly warm beneath the layer of soot. His jaw was clenched, a muscle ticking violently. I tried to check his pupils, but he jerked his head away. Don't touch me. His voice was a low growl, rough with smoke, but layered with an unmistakable command. It was the voice of a man who had never been told no in his life. Sir, I need to check for a concussion. You have a head wound, I stated, keeping my tone even, professional. I'd dealt with difficult patients before. Rich ones, powerful ones. They were often the worst. I'm fine. You're covered in soot, you have a bleeding head wound, and you were just pulled from a burning building. You're the opposite of fine, I countered, my patience, already worn to a thread, finally snapping. Now hold still, or I'll have security restrain you. We don't have time for this. A flicker of something, surprise? Respect, crossed his face. The older man at his side tensed, taking a step forward, but the man on the gurney lifted a single, soot-stained finger and the older man froze. The power in that small gesture was absolute. He turned his gaze back to me, and it was so intense I felt it like a physical touch. Then, he did something unexpected. He relaxed his head against the pillow. He held still. As I worked, cleaning the gash on his temple, checking the angry red burns that climbed his forearms, I was acutely aware of his eyes on me. He wasn't just a patient. He was a predator, observing, calculating. When I reached to cut away the scorched fabric of his shirt to better access a burn on his shoulder, his hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around my wrist. His grip wasn't painful, but it was unbreakable, a manacle of warm steel. The shock of it jolted through me, a strange current of heat and fear. I looked from his hand on my wrist to his face. His eyes were dark, unreadable pools. "My name," he rasped, his voice dropping lower, more personal, "is Julian." He held my gaze for a long moment, then released me as suddenly as he had grabbed me. My skin tingled where he had touched it. I finished my assessment in a haze, my professionalism a thin shield against the unnerving intensity of his presence. I documented his injuries, gave him a mild sedative against his protests, and moved on to the next victim of the fire, but the feeling of his storm gray eyes on my back and the ghost of his grip on my wrist followed me for the rest of my shift. 3 days later, the memory had faded, buried under the weight of 2 more grueling shifts and the familiar anxiety of rent being due. I was walking home, the city lights painting the damp pavement in streaks of neon, my shoulders aching with fatigue. A black car, a model so sleek and expensive it looked like a panther carved from obsidian, was parked at the curb in front of my rundown apartment building. It didn't belong here. It was like seeing a king in a homeless shelter. As I fumbled for my keys, the back door opened. The man who stepped out was the older man from the hospital, the one with the granite face. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, the polar opposite of Julian's ruined one. He moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years of discipline. He stood in my path, not menacingly, but immovably. "Miss Alara," he said. It wasn't a question. My heart hammered against my ribs. A cold dread, colder than the night air, washed over me. This was wrong. All of this was wrong. "How do you know my name?" "Mr. Julian was very impressed with your candor," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "He requires your services. He has had a complication with his injuries and refuses to return to the hospital. He insists on you." I shook my head, taking a step back. My keys felt slick in my palm. "I can't. I have a job. I don't do private nursing. Your supervisor has already been informed that you are taking a personal leave of absence, effective immediately. Your outstanding student loan balance of $142,000 has also been addressed," he said it so calmly, as if discussing the weather. My breath hitched. He knew. He knew the exact number that haunted my every waking moment. The number that kept me chained to this life. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Mr. Julian requires your care. You will be compensated beyond your imagining." It is not a request. The veiled threat in his tone was unmistakable. This wasn't about a job offer, it was a summons. They hadn't just found me, they had dissected my life, found my weakest point, and were now pressing down with surgical precision. My struggle, my desperation, was a tool for them to use. I looked from the man's impassive face to the gleaming black car, then up at the dingy window of my apartment. I had a choice, but it wasn't a choice at all. Resignation settled in my bones, heavy and cold. I was a fly caught in a web I hadn't even seen being spun. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like ash. The ride was silent and unnervingly smooth. They put a soft, velvet blindfold over my eyes after 10 minutes, a polite but firm gesture that cemented my status as a prisoner. The scent of rich leather filled the car. I tried to track the turns to get some sense of where we were going, but I quickly became disoriented. When the car finally stopped, the granite-faced man, Marcus, he'd told me his name was, gently guided me out. The air was different here. Cleaner. It smelled of pine and damp earth, a world away from the city's exhaust fumes. When he removed the blindfold, I gasped. We stood in the entryway of a house that was less a house and more a monument of glass, steel, and dark wood, built into the side of a hill overlooking a vast, dark forest. The interior was cavernous, minimalist, and breathtakingly expensive. A wall of glass 2 stories high framed the night sky. It was a beautiful prison, a gilded cage. Marcus led me through silent, echoing halls to a bedroom that was larger than my entire apartment. In the center of the vast room was a bed, and in the bed was Julian. The fury and raw power he had projected in the ER were gone, replaced by a pale, feverish vulnerability. His burns, which I had treated as minor, were clearly not. Angry red welts snaked up his arms, and a sheen of sweat coated his brow. His breathing was shallow. He was sick. Sicker than he had let on. The infection took hold yesterday, Marcus said quietly from the doorway. The doctor we have on retainer gave him antibiotics, but the fever won't break. He trusts no one. He asked for you. My fear warred with the ingrained instinct of a nurse. Seeing a patient in distress, my training kicked in, pushing aside the terror and confusion. I moved to the bedside. I put my hand on his forehead. He was burning up. His eyes fluttered open, those stormy depths now clouded with pain. He focused on me, a flicker of recognition, of relief, in their haze. You came, he rasped. You didn't give me much of a choice, I replied, my voice softer than I intended. For the next 2 days, the world shrank to the confines of that room. I worked tirelessly, changing his dressings, administering antibiotics, sponging his feverish skin with cool water. The intimacy of the tasks was unavoidable. My hands, which had trembled when Marcus approached me, were now steady as I cleaned the weeping skin of his burns. I saw the scars that littered his torso, old wounds, pale lines that told a story of violence I couldn't begin to comprehend. In his delirium, he murmured names I didn't know, spoke in a language that wasn't English. I saw the man beneath the monster, the vulnerability he kept hidden from the world. During these long hours, Marcus became a quiet presence. He brought me food on a tray, coffee in a delicate porcelain cup, and answered my questions in his terse, economical way. I learned that the fire was an assassination attempt by a rival family. They wanted Julian's territory, his empire. By pulling him from that building, by saving his life, I had inadvertently stepped into the middle of a war. They think he's dead, Marcus explained one evening, as we stood by the massive window, looking out at the darkening forest. His disappearance from the hospital supports that. It's the only thing keeping us safe right now. But when they find out he's alive, they will come for him. And they will come for anyone who helped him. He looked at me, his expression grim. That includes you, Alara. You're a loose end they will want to tie up permanently. The fear returned, sharp and acidic. I wasn't just a nurse anymore. I was a target. My simple, miserable life was gone, erased the moment I decided to treat the man in Bay 7. I was bound to Julian not just by coercion, but by a shared threat. My survival was now intrinsically linked to his. On the 3rd day, Julian's fever broke. I was dozing in a chair by his bed when I heard him stir. I opened my eyes to find him watching me, his gaze clear and sharp for the first time since I'd arrived. The storm was back, but there was something else in it now, something deeper. Thank you, he said, his voice still rough but firm. I was just doing my job, I said, the words automatic. No, he corrected me, his eyes pinning me in place. You did more than that. You stayed, he pushed himself up, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. He looked around the room, then his gaze settled on a file folder on the nightstand. He picked it up and held it out to me. My name was typed on the tab. My hands shook as I took it. Inside was my entire life, distilled into a collection of cold, hard facts. My nursing school transcripts. My credit report, a sea of red. A copy of my parents' death certificates. My employment history. Even a picture of my childhood home in Ohio. They had dug up everything. It was a profound violation, a stripping away of every private corner of my existence. Why? I whispered, my throat tight. I don't deal with unknowns, he said simply, without a hint of apology. When you stood up to me in that hospital, when you weren't afraid, I had to know who you were. I had to know what made you, he paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. I learned you were a good person trapped by circumstance. Someone who spends her life taking care of others, with no one to take care of her. I felt a strange, conflicting wave of emotions, anger at the invasion of my privacy, but also a startling, unfamiliar feeling of being truly seen. He hadn't just seen a nurse or a woman to be coerced. He had looked at the wreckage of my life and understood it. He had seen my strength, not just my desperation. As Julian recovered, a strange routine settled over the house. I was no longer just his nurse. I was a resident of this gilded cage. He insisted I eat my meals with him in a dining room with a table that could seat 30. Our conversations were stilted at first. He spoke little, asking pointed questions about my work, my life before. I answered cautiously, always aware that he was the predator and I was the prey. But slowly, a shift occurred. I saw flickers of the man behind the ruthless facade. A dry, unexpected wit. A surprising appreciation for classical music. An intense, unwavering focus in everything he did, whether it was a business call conducted in hushed, lethal tones, or watching the way I put sugar in my coffee. He was possessive, his eyes following me whenever I was in the room. He was protective, ordering Marcus to double the security patrols when a car was spotted on the distant main road. And beneath it all, an undeniable current of attraction crackled between us. It was in the way his gaze would linger on my mouth when I spoke, the way my skin would prickle with awareness when he stood too close. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I was falling for my captor, the man who had stolen my life and then saved it. The peace, however, was temporary. One afternoon, Marcus entered the library where Julian was reading and I was trying to lose myself in a novel. Marcus's face was grimmer than usual. "They know," he said, his voice low. A source confirmed it. "The Rivettis know you're alive, Julian. They're looking for you. And they have her name." He nodded towards me. The book fell from my lap. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Julian's face became a mask of cold fury. He rose from his chair, every trace of his recent vulnerability gone. He was the man from the ER again, all coiled power and lethal intent. "They will not touch her," he said, each word a chip of ice. He turned to me, his hands coming up to cut my face, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. His touch was surprisingly gentle. "I will not let anything happen to you, Alara. Do you understand?" His stormy eyes bored into mine, making a silent, deadly promise. In that moment, I believed him. I felt safer in the hands of this dangerous man than I had ever felt in my empty, ordinary life. The plan he devised was simple and audacious. The Rivettis had a weakness. Their youngest son was a reckless gambler with massive debts to a neutral third party. Julian intended to leverage that. But to set the trap, they needed a distraction, something to make the Rivettis lower their guard. They needed me. "I need you to go into town with Marcus," Julian explained, his voice devoid of emotion, though his eyes were turbulent. "Go to the pharmacy in the town square. Be seen. They have people watching, we know they do. They will see you alone, vulnerable. They will think you are an easy way to get to me." "You want me to be bait," I said, my voice flat. "You will not be in danger," he insisted, his jaw tight. "I will have a dozen men watching you. They will not get within 10 feet of you. But they need to see you. They need to take the bait so I can finish this." I looked at him, at the ruthless determination in his face, and I saw the only way out of this nightmare. It wasn't by running. It was by walking through it with him. I nodded once. "Okay." The trip into town was the most terrifying experience of my life. The quaint village felt like a war zone. Every person who glanced at me was a potential threat. Marcus drove, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands clenched in my lap, my heart a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I walked into the pharmacy, my legs like jelly, and bought a bottle of aspirin, my hands shaking so badly I could barely sign the credit card slip. I felt their eyes on me. I didn't see them, but I felt the weight of their surveillance like a physical shroud. The moment we were back in the car, Marcus's phone rang. He listened for a moment, then grunted. "They took it. The trap is set." That night, the mansion was on lockdown. Julian left with a team of grim-faced men, all dressed in black. He stopped in front of me before he walked out the door. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering for a fraction of a second on my cheek. Then he was gone. I waited. The hours crawled by, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall a hammer blow against the suffocating silence. I paced the length of the glass wall, watching the impenetrable darkness of the forest, imagining the worst. I realized, with a startling clarity that cut through the fear, that I wasn't just scared for myself. I was terrified for him. The thought of him being hurt, of him not coming back, was an agony that dwarfed my own fear. In this violent, opulent world I had been forced into, he had become my anchor. Just before dawn, the sound of cars on the gravel drive sent me running to the door. Julian walked in, flanked by his men. He was bruised, his knuckles were split, and there was a fresh cut over his eyebrow, but he was alive. He was victorious. His eyes found mine across the vast entryway, and the relief that flooded me was so powerful it made me dizzy. The war was over. The threat was gone. A week later, the bruises on his face had faded and an air of calm had settled over the house. He found me on the terrace, watching the sun set over the trees. He stood beside me, not speaking for a long time. The silence between us was no longer tense or awkward, but comfortable, familiar. "It's over," he said finally. "The Revettis will no longer be a problem. You're safe now." I turned to look at him, my heart sinking with a strange sense of loss. Safe. It meant I could leave. "Marcus will drive you home in the morning," he continued, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His voice was flat, businesslike. "I've arranged a transfer of funds to your account. Enough that you'll never have to worry about money again. You can go back to your life. You'll be free." Free. The word should have been a relief, a release. Instead, it sounded like a death sentence. Go back to my tiny apartment? To the endless, lonely shifts? To a life where no one saw me, where no one's eyes promised to burn the world down to keep me safe. The thought was unbearable. My old life wasn't a life. It was a slow, quiet drowning. Here, surrounded by danger and uncertainty, I had never felt more alive. "Is that what you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He finally turned to look at me, and the mask was gone. His eyes were raw, vulnerable, filled with a desperate longing that mirrored my own. "What I want is for you to be safe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My world is violent and ugly. You don't belong in it. You deserve better." "You think my old life was better?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping me. My old life was gray. It was empty. I was a ghost. Here, I trailed off, searching for the words. Here, I feel real. He took a step closer, closing the space between us. He raised a hand, as if to touch my face, but let it drop. "To stay with me, Alara, is to choose this life. The danger will not always be gone. There will always be another threat, another enemy. I can protect you, I can give you anything you want, but I cannot give you peace. I cannot give you normal." I looked into his stormy eyes, into the depths of the ruthless, broken, and protective man who had turned my world upside down. He was offering me an escape, return to the safety of the shore. But I had already tasted the storm, and I knew, with an absolute certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I could never go back. "I don't want normal," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I want this. I want you." A tremor went through his powerful frame. He searched my face, looking for any hint of doubt, of fear. He found none. He finally closed the distance between us, his hands finding their way to my waist, pulling me against him. He lowered his head, his forehead resting against mine. "Are you sure?" he breathed, the words a plea. "Once you choose this, there is no going back." I didn't need to answer with words. I slid my arms around his neck, stood on my toes, and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was not gentle. It was a clash of desperation and relief, of fear and belonging, a sealing of a pact made in fire and forged in blood. It was the taste of my future. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were blazing with a fierce, possessive light. He was mine, and I was his. The next morning, Marcus came to find me in the kitchen. I was making coffee, the motions familiar, domestic. "The car is ready, Miss Alara," he said, his expression unreadable. I picked up 2 mugs, pouring coffee into each. I handed one to him. "I won't be needing it, Marcus," I said, my voice steady. "But Julian is probably awake. He likes his coffee with 1 sugar." I turned and walked toward the master bedroom, toward my new life, leaving the loyal lieutenant standing in the kitchen with a slow, knowing smile spreading across his weathered face. I had made my choice. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was home,